Thanks to all of you out there for coming, and to my fellow panelists for joining me here. Just to make clear who's up here with me in the Zoom window, we have senior staff from every area of the college represented. Unfortunately, Letitia Haynes had a conflict for the college that needed to run at the same time, and so Ngoni agreed to step in to represent the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And in addition to senior staff, we have members representing the working group for preparing the college to open here as well, who can address specifics from that plan as well as operational details as we begin to answer your questions, and obviously from the Office of the Dean of the Faculty and from Human Resources as well. So I'm hoping with this group of people we can cover all the questions that you might have. I'm not going to make a big speech today, but I did just want to first begin by thanking the two working groups that worked so tirelessly since April. I think when we launched those working groups, I could never have imagined we would be able to answer as many questions as we have gotten to, and that's really due to the tremendously hard work and many hours of people putting in extra time above and beyond their regular work for the college. And I'm very grateful to those members of those committees. And yet, as far as we've gotten with answering questions, there are questions we have not yet fully answered. And I think we will try our very hardest to answer the questions that you've brought today. But I would also note that we're continuing to work. Yesterday was our announcement day, but that doesn't mean that we are stopping in all of the work that's going to go into preparing the campus for September. And it means there are issues either that are not fully determined yet, first of all, or second of all, that we may not have thought of. And that, I think, is partly why all of your many helpful questions to the portal all the way through the process and in these kinds of conversations have been helpful in getting us where we need to go. So I want to thank you in advance for your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them and or get back to you when we have better answers for things that we haven't yet fully come to. And of course, I think it's worth noting that this is in many ways, and will continue to be a work in progress. As I said in the letter that I put out to the community yesterday, I'm continuing to watch local, national, and frankly, global conditions very closely. And that will continue to factor in for decisions in the fall and decisions going forward beyond that. And so that just because yesterday was an announcement day doesn't mean we're going to stop being attuned to those details and continuing to do what we need to do on this campus to put the best precautions in place to make sure that the community can function as safely as possible. The last thing I want to say before I open up the floor to questions is really the watchword for all of this work has been flexibility. And so we've been trying to create a plan that would allow people to figure out what would work for them and to use the components of the components of the plan that they can in order to live comfortably here in Williamstown in the fall, whether you're faculty, students, staff, or affiliated with the college. Having said that, I think it is also worth noting that alongside that flexibility is a tremendous amount of hard work that folks who are redesigning courses in order to meet this new set of conditions, struggling under continuing uncertain child care and schooling decisions that are being made for the state, folks who already had really big and important work supporting students here on the campus and whose work has just gotten all the much more important and all the much more challenging as we support students in what is going to be a rather different environment. So flexibility has been part of this, but I also just want to acknowledge the tremendous hard work that goes into working and supporting the Williams community as we move into this mode. So I want to thank you for that, all you've done so far and all that you're going to be doing going forward. And with that, I think I will turn over the floor to questions. And Jim, you want to talk about how we're going to do that?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Maud. And we're up at about 566 participants now. So people clearly have a lot of questions on their mind. And I'm glad that we could do this session. The way it will work is one of two ways. You can raise your hand down at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a little icon that you can use to do that, and we will work through those questions as time allows. And then you can also use the chat function to submit questions if you want to do so either anonymously or if you just prefer not to be on the air and want to write it. Abby Wood Metro from my office is monitoring those, and I want to thank her for help, and she'll forward those on to us so that we can read them out. So either of those options is available. So please jump in. I'm going to ask one question that we had kind of on our list that we heard a lot yesterday, just to get us started while folks kind of get ready to ask their own. It came up a lot yesterday, Maud, how people will, or how Williams actually will get people to follow the rules. We're expecting a lot out of people this fall. So I wonder if you and others on the call want to talk about that.
Sorry, I muted myself. Thank you so much for the question, Jim. And I do know I have heard this from a number of sources, certainly yesterday, but before yesterday too, as we move into welcoming so many people back into Williamstown and onto the campus. And here's how I think about this. And I've been trying to talk to as many people about this as I can, and I'm going to continue to do it going forward. We are asking a lot of everybody, and we will be sending out a community contract that we are hoping all members of our community will sign. Certainly all returning students will be asked to sign it before they come back, as will staff and faculty. The goal of this document is to really make clear that community health is a public responsibility, that each one of us who participates in the campus is individually responsible for themselves and for the rest of the community in what is a collective goal of keeping us all healthy. There is no way to do this in a disciplinary way, actually. And I am sure any one of us at moments in our lives, but particularly in the last few weeks, have sometimes made a choice that wasn't the choice that public health authorities was saying was the most important, which is to wear a mask, to engage in full social distancing, and to engage in extra cleaning activities. Everything we know from public health, every advisor I talk to has said to me, A, they've encouraged me to open, and B, they have said that to do this well, these are the acts that we all have to engage in. And in the places around the country where there have been surges, it's been very clearly tied to the fact that people aren't doing that. And so how do we get there is really the key question. And here I would argue we are all responsible for ourselves and each other. I would ask you to encourage people you see not engaging in safe social distancing and mask wearing to do so. We will have extra masks available in classroom buildings, for example. If you're a faculty member teaching a course and a student arrives without a mask, I think you can ask them simply to go out into the hallway and get themselves a mask before they join the classroom. Similarly, as they enter dining halls, all our food is going to be provided in a to-go fashion, but we can ask that anybody who arrives without a mask to go back to their rooms and get one when they enter into public spaces. So this is something we are creating a student-facing public health advisory group made up of student leaders across the campus, and they too will be working to help us encourage everybody to engage in best practices. And that's a way we can together focus not on rule breaking, but rather on what we need to do collectively as members of this community, but frankly as members of our global community to help fight back against COVID.
Thanks, Maud. I appreciate that. And moving on to the next one, which came in over the chat function. And just so people, if you care, I'm only looking over at the other screen to track questions. I'm not answering emails while the panel's going on. Mindful of the etiquette on that. This came in from an anonymous person, and it said, it's somebody who perceives that there's a technology support gap between faculty and staff offices. And they ask, will premium Zoom accounts and access to materials through the ELC be available to individual staff and staff offices like it's been available to faculty? We have somebody who can field that one. Matt Sheehy, please.
Yeah, Jim, I think that's a great question, and good morning to everybody. I think these types of technology needs will be part of the departmental reopening work plans that each department will go through. And those plans will be reviewed by OIT, facilities, human resources, and others. And If there is a departmental need and an identified need, the answer is yes, right? So we will be looking at those specific to individual departments. It won't be sort of a overarching, we're just going to open up those types of things. We have to assess the viability of the technology and those kinds of things. And Barron and his team in the Office of Information Technology will be heavily involved in those conversations, but it will be part of a detailed understanding of the need and the work plan that individual departments develop.
Thanks, Matt. Maybe we could move to one of the folks who've had their hands up. Manuel Morales from biology, I know, has had his hand up for a while. So Patrick, maybe if you could help with unmuting for Professor Morales. Manuel, are you there? It looks like you're still muted. You may need to unmute yourself at your end as well. Let's see if I can do it from here. One more moment. Manuel, are you able to speak yet? You're showing up as muted. Patrick, any advice for us on what to do here?
Yeah, just has to unmute on their side.
Ah, there we go.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. That was just a mistake.
That's fine. Welcome.
Okay.
What's your question, Manuel?
No question. I accidentally hit raise hand. I'm very sorry.
Okay, thank you. It's good to hear from you. Then we'll go to our next hand up, which is from Owen Ozier. Owen, are you there and ready to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, this is Owen Ozier. I'm an incoming professor in the economics department, and I'm really excited to become a part of the Williams community this fall. My question is, to what extent is the college taking advantage of the next month and a half before students arrive to construct or modify buildings, perhaps even including the old Williams Inn, to set up additional individual quarantine rooms in preparation for, frankly, the inevitable situation that students or others in the Williams community become infected? It seems that the college has both time on its side, if it's acting to do this now, and space on its side in a way that more urban schools really do not. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Fred, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. So we have a plan for different levels of students numbers of students coming back to campus, and have set aside both isolation beds for positive cases and quarantine beds for close contacts. We are also in contact with local hotels to get additional space. But Owen, one thing we've learned from our public health experts is we're not going to use, if we do need to have spaces off campus, those will not be used for quarantine or isolation. We want those students on campus so we can better monitor them and also feed them.
Thanks, Fred. Why don't we take one? Tim Lebesky has had his hand up for a while as well, and then we'll move to a couple of the questions that have come in on chat. Tim, are you ready to speak?
Yeah, got me? Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the testing that we're going to be doing on campus with the students. And I'm really happy to hear about the decision of partnering with the Broad. I would certainly encourage anyone to go look on the website. If you just Google Broad Institute COVID testing, it has a lot of statistics and their efficacy. I just had a couple of quick questions. So my understanding is that we're going to be asking the students to self-administer, or staff or faculty self-administer, nasal swabs and then ship it back. And so I guess my question, I've got two. The first one is basically, what is that going to look like programmatically for this first wave of testing and also the weekly tests? Not just for a fear of compliance, but also an education. I mean, I think in order for those tests to be effective, the students really have to understand, how deep to dig in their nose, or what that means to put it in the special media that those swabs have to be encased in order for the test to work correctly. So I guess that's my first question, if we could talk about that for a second.
So Jen, I'll take that. So these tests will be self-administered. They're not the invasive ones all the way up your nose. They're just in your nose. And they will be observed by a health professional. So you won't be doing it by yourself. You'll be in front of a health professional who can help you with that.
I think Tim had a second question. Maybe
Yeah,
I'm wrong.
he did, and then he jumped off. Tim, you're not still there, correct? If you want to raise your hand. Oh, there you are. Patrick, maybe you can unmute him. Tim, welcome back.
Great, thanks. Sorry. And my other question is just, I mean, I think all of us watching the national rise of cases in other states, and also knowing how, I don't know, I feel lucky we've been in the Berkshires for cases. Like, I think that there's also going to be a pressure as we bring students back. I mean, I think we have to recognize that our student population might present a health risk for the larger community. And I guess my question is there any possibility of having a greater capacity to offer testing within our community around us for maybe student-facing businesses in Williamstown and North Adams to get on board with the Broad Institute testing as a good faith effort for the community? That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. We've talked about the possibility if we get enough tests from Broad to open up the community, but we haven't really pursued those plans yet. But that is something that's on our list to talk about.
Okay, we're going to move over to some of the questions that have come in over chat next. Let's see if I could, there have been a few, so I'll start in chronological order, more or less. First one came in from an anonymous attendee. I'm a new faculty member who has expressed a willingness to teach in person, but I'm a commuter living 90 minutes from Williams. I'm concerned that teaching in person will be untenable. What resources are there to support commuters specifically? And a more general question that would be useful actually to answer for a lot of reasons, where do we direct our concerns and questions?
This might be, well, so specifically the question about supporting faculty, I think the answer would be to the Dean of the Faculty's Office. So, and we have both our outgoing Dean, Denise, in her last day representing that office, and Safa, our incoming Dean. So both are here and could say perhaps a word or two more about that. Do you want to say something, Denise?
Sure, I can start. I don't know that this is a super satisfying answer. I want to acknowledge that. It is fine for a faculty member who is choosing to teach on campus in person to have a 90-minute commute. We just want to clarify that that's okay. You're permitted to drive back and forth that kind of distance to be able to come to campus to teach your classes. And I'm not sure what the question is behind additional support. So that's not clear. I'm not able to answer the question maybe in a satisfactory manner because I'm not quite sure what the individual has in mind when they're asking about extra support. Faculty members, as all faculty know, have the option to teach remotely. So that is a decision that somebody could make even up until the last minute to change their modality. But there's no impediment for a commuting faculty to come to campus to teach in person as one would do ordinarily if one were a commuter. So Safa, is there anything else you want to add there?
I would just say feel free to reach out if there is a particular part of your question that that we haven't answered. I'm quite happy to respond in person. So send me an email or send Denise an email, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you both. Moving on to another couple of questions, and this is a little bit of a cluster, two of them that came in together. So one is about how the college is going to recognize people who are working harder than ever, particularly recognizing that there's some inequities just by nature of function and how much time people have available to work or how much work they have. Related to that, I wonder what's being done to address burnout in those who have been working hard. People can't take vacation time. Is the college considering a brief break or shutdown as some other schools have done? Mud.
Just muted myself, sorry. We haven't at the moment talked about a shutdown, although again, it's one of the topics that's come up, and the thinking about the when is really more of the issue. And I know, because I think everybody on this panel has been experiencing what it's been like to go into a summer that has a totally different rhythm to it, and the degree to which people are really pouring tons of time and effort and work into this moment. And of course, as I said at the beginning, I'm very grateful for that. We are shutting down and moving to completely remote learning at Thanksgiving. So there will be, in terms of the on-campus experience of working with students here in the campus, there will be a long break from Thanksgiving through the end of winter study. But that, of course, doesn't speak to the problem that folks are having right now. And I would say, I really hope on the staff side that we do start thinking about how people can take vacations and take a break, because this is going to ask a lot of us going forward. And without those kinds of breaks, we're not going to be able to get where we need to go with the kind of spirit that we need. And so I do hope that managers start working with their divisional teams to think about how folks on the teams can take some break time over the next several weeks.
Yeah, I would only follow up, Maud, and say that we have asked supervisors and department heads to send us recommendations of people who have gone above and beyond. And while we can't financially support them with merit increases this year, we are compiling that list of people who have gone above and beyond for when we can actually make some sort of compensation increase.
Thank you. The questions are really piling up in chat, which is to be expected when we have now more than 600 folks and a lot on our minds. So please be patient. If you asked a question, we'll work through them as best we can. And I know there are 2 people with their hands up, so I'll come back to those in a minute. But we had kind of a cluster of 3 questions that were followed up from Tim Lebesky's. So I thought I'd maybe turn to those quickly about testing. And I'll take them in order. The first says, it's fantastic that the college will be so thorough with testing. 2 questions along those lines. 1, what type of test will be used, antibody or antigen? And 2, not unrelatedly, what actions or consequences would a positive test result trigger?
So it's a nasal swab test that we're given. And the way this will work, if I can answer the question this way, is they will be shipped to Cambridge for testing. We're guaranteed result back between 24 and 36 hours of the test. If a test comes back positive, the individual and the health provider will be alerted, and there'll be immediate contact tracing. So you'll get a correspondence from a local contact tracer here in the county, and all close contacts of the positive will then be contacted and asked to quarantine.
Fred, it might be helpful, since I know there have been some following up questions, it might be helpful for this audience to hear what contact tracing actually means, because I think there's some misunderstanding about that.
That's a good point. The contact tracers will be contacting, as I said, positive cases and asking them who they've been in contact with, that is within close contact, inside 6 feet, for more than 10 or 15 minutes. So just passing someone in the hallway or standing behind them in line at the dining hall will not be considered a close contact. In fact, it will not be automatic that everyone in a class of a positive case will be contacted as a close contact, because we're going to have students and faculty 6 feet apart, all wearing masks in the classroom. So that will not be considered a close contact.
Can I just jump in? I think part of the question was whether it is an antibody or antigen test. Fred, did you want to touch base on that piece?
You got me. We're not testing if people have is that the antibody test? I'm not.
It's the antibody test. So it's looking for current antibodies. It's not the antigen test that would show whether you've ever been exposed.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'll move through a couple more of these testing ones, and then I'll turn to some of the folks who have their hands up. The next one related to this is, will COVID testing be required of staff or only made available? As indicated in Maud's email, weekly testing will be required of students. Is the same true for staff if it's being required at all?
We will require tests for faculty and staff who come to campus and interact on campus. If you are working from home, there'll be no need for a mandatory test.
And related to that, Fred, maybe if you want to stay on, a question about why are we waiting on testing staff that are starting to come back to work either recently or in the near future?
So Broad Institute has not set up the process yet, so we can't activate the program yet. We are meeting with Deb Flynn and the Health Center and I have been meeting with Broad all along. We have another meeting to work out some of the logistics this week. So hopefully we'll have news on how quickly we can start that testing.
Jim, I'll just add, I think this would be an important part of the discussion, as Matt has already started to say in the work plan discussions, as we evaluate who is coming in contact with the public and student-facing roles. So we have a draft idea of who those individuals are based on their job function, but that'll be important to clarify what that looks like. And, you know, I think we've also been pretty clear if there are staff who want them, we are hoping to make that available as well, to make it as broadly accessible.
Thank you for that. Maybe now we can move to a couple of the folks who've been patiently waiting with their hands up. I will just say for those of you who are calling in before we let you speak that, well, sometimes I can see your names depending on how your phone is set up. I'm going to allow people to remain anonymous unless you choose to identify yourself. So that'll be up to you when you come on the air. But Patrick, maybe if we could allow the first person in that list to speak now. How are we going to do this? Your email address starts with a T. So
I think that's Tina Lemaire, I'm pretty sure.
You are correct. Tina, would you like to ask your question? You're going to have to unmute yourself. Tina, you may need to unmute yourself at your end. You're all set at this end if you'd like to ask your question. There we go. Tina?
I must have hit my phone when I was trying to move it, so no question.
Okay, thanks, Tina. Then we'll move on to the next one, which is, oh, okay, I see that people are visible. So Liu, if you'd like to ask your question, please.
Yes, Liu from Chinese and Asian Studies. So I have two questions. A few weeks ago, some of the CFLC TAs and language fellows who were still staying on campus underwent a quarantine at Poker Flats because of a suspected COVID case. Unfortunately, the test results came back negative. So it was a false alarm. But I guess it was a good fire drill for all the officers and personnel who were involved in that case. I was wondering, how many such like fire drills have we done so far in the past few weeks? And also through these drills, what kind of weak areas have we identified? And how are we going to deal with these weak links? So that's the first question, yeah.
Thank you, Lee. I will take a crack and then I'll pass it on to Matt, who may remember more than I do because he's younger than me. So we've had several instances where students, like I'll give you one example, a student left Williamstown to go to a doctor's appointment and had to come back in quarantine when they came back from the doctor's appointment. So we had a couple of those cases. In terms of issues we run into, one of them was getting students to fully understand what a quarantine meant and that they had to stay in their room, in their bathroom. I think that's been worked out as we've gone through these. But I don't remember any major issues or problems we've had. I don't know, Matt, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think each of these situations, whether it was Lee, the one that you described, or others that we've had with students who have returned, one of the things we've learned is communication is exceptionally important and setting expectations. So we've implemented some strategies, particularly with our students who remain here during the summer. They sign a commitment when they come back that explains exactly, as Fred highlighted, what does quarantine mean. But what was really positive is we learned a lot about how to set up our quarantine spaces. It's given our facilities team and our dining team really an opportunity to test out the processes that we put down on paper. And I would say, generally speaking, we've been able to fine tune those processes. They worked really, really well. But I would say the one area is continuing to set those expectations and communicate effectively, not only with the people that are impacted, but departments as well, to ensure that everybody is on the same page and how we all responding and keeping everybody in the loop and on the same page.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred and Matt, for the answers. I think I agree that communication is really the key. I happen to have talked to a few people who were directly involved in that, in one of the quarantine case. And I think there's some areas that the college might look further into. One thing is that there seems to be confusion as to like how many days are supposed to be in a quarantine. And also some of them were confused as to how, when the quarantine was declared to end, they didn't know whether they should continue to self-isolate or not. So there seemed to be miscommunication there. And also some of the feedback that I've heard is that the apartments that they were located to, it was dark, the lighting was really bad, and if students have to study there, there would be an issue. And there was also no laundry facility in the apartment, so that could be another area that people need to look at. And also, the students were really asked to move into those space on their own, completely on their own. And when they leave, they are also completely on their own. So I was wondering if a student is, it doesn't have any symptoms, that's fine. But if they're sick, then they have to lug their luggage all the way to those spaces. That will be, you know, I don't know how people can handle that.
So we for the quarantine isolation beds, we've resolved the laundry issue. We set those up to be laundry facilities for them. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about the procedures we got in place for the actual move.
Right. So Lee, I think you raise a very good point. And one of the things, once again, going back to setting expectations is defining what all people should bring with them. And recognizing that when a student moves into these spaces, we'll be providing a lot for them. So linens and all of those kinds of things. So really what needs to be brought for that period of time is really a set of clothes and some personal items, that it's not a full move from one space to the other, and just making sure that we set up those expectations appropriately. And I take your thoughts to heart and understand that guidance was changing swiftly and fast. And so we understand that there might have been some confusion. There have been times that have changed that says 72 hours, other times it said 10 days. So we're going to be very, very clear and outline those expectations. As we said, the communication will be key. And we've definitely learned from that some of those pieces. And you know, the move pieces is difficult, but our hope is that we can find a process that makes it easy and swift and not onerous on those who might be asked to move in those situations. And as Fred highlighted, I believe we have a series of spaces on campus, central to campus, that would minimize the impact to people who have to move, and they have the right facilities and all of those kinds of things. That was definitely something we learned through the process, and appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Lee. We're gonna, I appreciate those questions. We're gonna move on to a couple of things now that have come in over the chat. There's kind of another cluster this time around student issues. So I'll actually ask all three questions at once, and if you guys can keep your pencils out and help me keep track, or I can take you back to them if we forget. But the first one is, how many students are expected to return in the fall? The second one, will there be a cap on the number of students who are able to come back if the desire from students and families outweighs our capacity to have them here? Is there a plan for what happens if nearly everyone returns? And then the third one, a little bit different tack, will there be a cap on the number of students who can take more than 3 courses? If too many students want to take more than 3, how will that affect courses and faculty that teach them?
So I'll take a quick shot at the students. We don't know how many students are going to come. There are surveys out there, but we really don't know, and won't know until they decide next week. We have plans in place for different numbers of students coming back to campus, so we can accommodate as many as decide to come back. And depending on how many students decide to come back, we may implement some off-campus housing. But we're confident we can handle as many students as want to come back. And I'll hand off to Marlene for the question about classes.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that we're not putting we're not turning students away who want to come back. We will work to accommodate our students. I wanted to address the question about the fourth class. Individual courses and faculty have caps on their courses. And so when your course is capped, then you have some agency over whether you want to over-enroll or not. But we're not putting a cap on students' ability to take a fourth class if they can find one. Or a fifth class for that matter, if they can find courses that they're interested in and there's available space.
Thank you. Before we go on, I want to say something that I should have said at the beginning, which is if everybody could please mute their devices. One of the things we've learned in faculty meetings is people who use hearing aids or other assistive devices, sometimes those alerts are extremely loud for them. So if any of you who are speaking, and I couldn't tell who it was, but if you could take a moment just to mute so we don't get those calendar pings, they can be quite painful for some folks. And the same goes for anybody who's asking a question. Speaking of which, I think at this point we'll move on. Dorothy Wand has had her hand up for a little while. So Dorothy, maybe if we could turn to you and you'd like to ask your question.
Hello. So thank you everyone for all the hard work that's been done. I actually have a question that's both a public health question and about other aspects of COVID. As we know, it is primarily a public health issue. And so my question on that aspect of it is that we know that obviously it affects, disproportionately affects parts of the population, people who are older, who have autoimmune, but also Black and brown people. So I'm wondering if there will be some sort of at least public acknowledgement from the administration about the disproportionate death rates for Black and brown faculty, staff, students, and if there's been consideration of that. And also I'm thinking about this has actually been raised in one of the earlier faculty meetings, that for faculty and staff who do not have family here, who are international, single, queer, trans, POC, people who are really obviously carry a lot of stress normally being a member of the Williams community. I'm wondering about if we've thought about how to support those people as well. Because what I've heard so far has been a lot about, say, people with kids who have to do extra childcare during the quarantine. So, and then I'm also wondering, as a related issue, that we do know that the COVID pandemic has been heavily politicized. So for some people, not wearing a mask is really a free speech issue. It's an ideological issue. So I know that there's no way to police that, but I'm wondering, if there are faculty and staff and students who feel like they don't want to wear a mask, not because they forgot one, but because they feel strongly about this. And I'm just wondering, have you all thought about that at all? And even things like, I'm sorry this is going on so long, but another thing I've thought about is the stigmatization through, say, joking. People joking about, say, Kung Flu or, that kind of less overt kind of thing, it's all of a piece. I'm really thinking about the public health and more political or ideological aspects of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorothy. So let me jump in first just with the broad question you asked about public acknowledgement of how the COVID crisis has disproportionately affected communities of color. Yes, this is one of the things that, of course, we're all profoundly aware of. We're aware of the disproportionate impact of COVID on our own student population, depending on where they had to go over the last few months and the kinds of conditions they faced. The kind of health risks have been varied. And that is certainly one of the factors that, among many, that were, I think, all in all of our minds when we thought about could we bring students back to campus, which can't address all of those issues, but was certainly on my mind as one of the factors at play. So I think that's something we're profoundly aware of. I wonder if, Safa, you want to say anything about faculty and staff support. I think before I hand it to you, I would just say that one of the things that's been very clear to me since coming here, and it's been re-articulated quite a bit over the last few weeks, is the way in which faculty and staff of color do disproportionate work supporting often students of color. And that is something that the college is thinking a lot about and trying to figure out ways we can address that going forward. But Safa, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
I just first want to thank you for your questions. I think they're good ones, and ones that have been at the back of our minds as we thought about policies going forward. So part of the reason that we have as flexible a policy as we have regarding teaching, which, as you may have read, is not the only kind of policy that colleges and universities have been enacting, is because we have these sorts of inequities in mind, and we think that people should be able to make their own choices about what is best for them. But you are right in that being brown or black or queer or trans in this particular community can be particularly challenging for those folks. And so I think that the faculty's office is really looking for input about ways in which we can continue to support all members of our community. And I would love to have more conversations about this with you.
And I'll just quickly add from a community perspective around staff, and what your question evokes for me, Dorothy, is this feeling of isolation that we're hearing about, and emotional well-being of the whole person, and being able to be healthy to do any of your work. And one of the things we thought a lot about in HR and are working on launching is sort of creating these community affinity groups, communities of Williams that we're calling them. So we're launching a model that people then can really come together in whatever shared dimension of identity or shared interest, that people can have a sense of connection in this, what's going to be a more prolonged remote setting, so that we can help facilitate some of that connection. And also the employee wellness component is an underlying thing that we're thinking a lot about as well.
And Goni, I wonder if there is something you would like to add from the perspective of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion around some of the issues Dorothy raised as well.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Maud. My apologies. I managed to step on my power off button earlier, so I had to. I was gone and trying to get back on. Just to add to the comments, I do think the institutional diversity, equity, and inclusion. Already, we've had a number of sessions with faculty and staff. Letitia's at one right now. I think those will continue, and I do think, along with colleagues of the Davis Center, stand ready to support students, faculty, staff, and members of the community. So I would, reiterate the comments, the request really to share your thoughts and ideas around some of the things we could continue to do and new things we might create as we are all facing this really extended isolation, as Danielle mentioned, and thinking about more creative and supportive ways to build community and to support those who are disproportionately affected by COVID.
Thanks, Ngoni. Appreciate that. I'm going to move now to a question that actually came in over the last few days that's been percolating, and you can see it in a bit of, if for those of you who are watching the chat, you can see it underlying some of the questions that have come in there. It has to do with work plans, and this is maybe Fred and Matt specifically for you guys. You could talk a little bit about how the rollout of the return to campus work plans will work. I know a few managers have been already asking HR about temporary staffing needs and those kinds of things. So maybe if you could help us think through what it actually looks like for those of us who will be returning, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'll let Matt take the load here because he's working closely with, and has worked already closely with many departments on their preliminary work plans. But I think that what I'd like to say is the key here is we're going to be flexible, and we're going to devise plans for each department to meet their needs so they can meet the needs of the people they work with. The goal here is not to rush back to campus after the July 4th holiday. We can take a phased approach and the whole idea is if you can continue to work from home, that's what we should do. But I'll let Matt talk about the detailed process he and his team have put together to analyze his plans and help the departments come up with their individual plan. Matt?
Thanks, Fred and Jim, for the question. As I insinuated earlier with respect to the question around Zoom and Zoom Premium and access to those types of resources, I think it was important that we recognized early on that campus departments and campus offices look vastly different as you go across the campus. And so it would be presumptuous to put in a plan for the overarching campus for every individual office. The interactions that people have, the way individual offices are created and set up, the furniture, the spaces are all vastly different. And so to ensure that offices have an opportunity to really think those things through, we've launched the work plan or reopening work plan template, which is available on the HR website. And the goal of that template is to deal with things like additional temp staffing needs or OIT requests or physical improvements or specific PPE needs or procurement needs. Before offices go out and make those types of requests or do those types of purchases, we're really encouraging folks to work with direct managers and supervisors on what is your individual department's reopening work plan. As Fred said, the overarching goal is to de-densify campus. So if you can continue to work from home, we're going to encourage those as part of individually developed work plans. We recognize that that won't work for every office, particularly student-facing offices. And there's a number of things that we need to work through and we'll be working through over the coming months. One of those items, believe it or not, is mail. How do deliveries get to campus? How does mail get to campus? How do they get into buildings? I think one of the things we started with is an overarching assumption is that building access will be limited to outsiders. Students, faculty, and staff, where we can, will be badging into spaces or have controlled access to spaces. That means seeing vendors on campus, walking into buildings and walking down hallways and delivering boxes or delivering mail is going to look vastly different. And we will work with individual departments on what those plans are and ensure that it works for those individual departments and the staffing in those departments. So if you have requests for staffing or needs or purchases, let's work through those work plans. We have a committee established who will review those work plans and then get individual senior staff approval before implementing them and doing mass purchasing. I also want to highlight, as part of those work plans, we have a strategic procurement group who is working through the purchasing and procurement of everything from fabric face coverings to required face masks to mass levels of soap and hand sanitizer and sanitizing stations and everything in between. And we will work through those work plans to ensure that we distribute centrally to offices all of the needs that they have to reopen per their work plan. And I'd just like to make sure that Danielle has an opportunity to add to that.
Well, Matt, I just wanted to share all the great work that you guys have done to pilot this, actually. So we've had some really large and smaller units go through this, the library, WICMA, dining, CSS, I'm sure I'm forgetting others. So we tested it, we made adjustments to this plan. And the next step, I think, for rollout, we plan to bring together the President's Administrative Group, the PAG group that normally gets together, that is the leadership of a lot of administrative units, to do a little more preview, a deeper dive, roll out the tools, and then we'll collaborate with the Dean of the Faculty's office on how to do this in academic areas where there's smaller staff populations in individual offices. We felt like that needs a different approach. So as that process question, you won't be doing this on your own, but we welcome you to take a look at it, start drafting it, and think about the questions you have to bring to the table. There will be opportunities for one-on-one counseling with the subcommittee and the individual unit.
Thanks. I'm going to shift over now to a couple of questions about student conduct. So I'm out of chronological order for those of you who are submitting messages versus chat, but via chat, but I'm trying to make sure that we cover kind of the various areas of interest. So we've had one from Gail Newman and one from somebody who's anonymous about student issues, and maybe we can combine them. The first is from Gail saying, following up on Maud's remarks about collective enforcement, I'm concerned, frankly, less about classes and dining halls than what happens outside of class hours. What if we find out about large parties or other gatherings? Will disciplinary action be taken? And then maybe related to this, at least tangentially, students have been talking a lot about this idea of pods, that students will be living together in groups of quote unquote pods. Do we know what common spaces around campus will look like as we go through phases? Can we facilitate that so that it gives us a way to feel safe while also giving students spaces where they can be social?
So Fred, maybe you want to just talk briefly about or Matt, maybe around the configuration of dorm space, and then we can go to the disciplinary question.
Sure. So our goal is to have all students in single rooms. We can accommodate over 1,500 students in single rooms. And in certain instances, they'll be in what has been Jim referred to as a pod. So there'll be a wing or a pod of up to 6 students. Right now is our current plan. And those students will kind of act like a family. We've gone over this concept with our public health advisors, and they support it. And within that small group, the social distancing and the mask wearing will not be required, because it's much like all of us in our family situations. But students will be asked to, if they're in another, they go to another dorm, to wear masks and social distance. So that's the concept of the pod. Those pods will share a bathroom, and they will be able to socialize, if you will, in the pod without the social distancing or the masking. So that's the concept of the pod.
Thanks. And then maybe Marlene, you and I can talk about the question of disciplining. We obviously, again, I have to go into this and say, and I understand many of you listening will take this with a grain of salt, but we want to stop the parties before they happen, as it were. In other words, there's so much of this has to be really about leaning into this collective responsibility that I talked about at the beginning. Now, I know you're listening and saying, yes, but people will break the rules. And of course, I know that's true. And yes, of course, we will have disciplinary follow-up with egregious rule breakers through the channels that we use, through the Office of the Dean of the College. And when you have egregious rule breakers, there are consequences. That's always the case on a campus. But obviously, if we've gotten to that point, it's already a problem in a certain sense. And so the work that we do out of the gate this summer, we're sending the contract to students to read over, I believe later today was the plan, or sometime very soon, so that they can see what it is that we're talking about. I certainly will waste no opportunity to share the significance. And really, I think the key here is for people to understand that they're not protecting themselves, they're protecting other people. They're protecting each other, they're protecting folks working in the dining hall, they're protecting the custodians, they're protecting the faculty, and frankly, they're protecting our ability to keep the campus open. So the understanding that we are engaged in this thing that they want, that this isn't something out there to punish them, but in fact to allow for our campus to function, is the message that we have to keep getting out. And like any public health message, you can think of many in your lifetime, there is no moment you have to keep saying it over and over and over. And there are people who won't listen, of course. But my hope is the very smart members that make up all sectors of our community will understand what's at stake in working together to get there. Marlene, do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, sure. I will say that I am heartened by the number of students who have gotten in touch with me since the announcement went out yesterday, asking if they could please see a copy of the community commitment form, that they didn't feel they could make an informed decision about whether or not they wanted to enroll in person until they saw it. I think that's really good news, because that means that students aren't just saying, yes, I want to be back here, I don't really care how or why. So that is heartening news. And I also think that one of the things that we have done well on this campus over the past 10 years or so is work really hard to help students be active bystanders. We've had really active campaigns on that front in regard to safe alcohol use and safe, healthy relationships and consent around intimacy, and the idea that everybody has a part to play, that everybody in this community, faculty, students, and staff, play a role when they see something not safe in speaking up, and in a way that that they feel that they can be heard and other people can hear, that this is really a collective effort. And I think that we're going to have to amp up that kind of bystander momentum on campus, because that's going to be our best resource, is to work on this on the front end.
And I wanted to add just one other thing to this, because there are, I believe, over 600 people who work here on the call. One of the things that our public health advisors have made clear to me repeatedly, and our public health advisors are sort of a catch-all phrase, but these are our own alumni and parents who work very deeply in immunological and epidemiological and healthcare work. And I've been talking to quite a large number of them at a relatively high rate. And one of the things they have said when I've asked the question, what's the single most important thing? Actually, I think Boyana asked this question to give credit where credit's due. What is the single most important thing that Williams can do to, make the highest impact on shaping the public health outcomes on campus? And what they said was, Maud, you wear a mask. That another, and I'm going to, and I want to sort of put that back out into the community, that we ourselves, by demonstrating good behavior and talking about it, not just doing it, but saying in a classroom to your students or in other work environments where you're working with students, why you're doing that, and how important it is, and how you think about it as a collective responsibility, and who is in your head when you put that mask on, your family, your colleagues, your students, your community. You can help. And so again, we can flip this from what are we going to do when people get in trouble, and rather talk about how we can co-educate and ourselves, because we're all learning. This is a new moment. We are a learning community. We are evidence-based, and we want to keep invoking and sharing best practices. So please help in that regard.
Marlene and Maud, if you don't mind, I just want to add that as part of that commitment, another important piece will be, as you highlighted, the education piece, and there will be an extensive program around signage and communication around how to encourage positive public health behaviors on campus. And we're actively working on that, coming together with Jim's team on a design that is fun, not sort of in your face and demanding, but finds ways to encourage and reminds people effectively to practice these types of behaviors for our community's public health. And I just want to add that's being done. We will see it. It will be very visible, and it will be a healthy reminder to wear your mask, or how to navigate campus or navigate a building effectively to maintain social distancing and do those kinds of things. And that'll be an important piece of the puzzle as well. That is part and parcel to the commitment.
And I'll just lastly say that we are doing town halls with students and families over the next 48 hours. And this is the words I've said here are things I will be saying there too. So again, using every opportunity possible to make this message, take this message home.
Thank you, guys. Shift now maybe to a few questions we've gotten, unsurprisingly, about childcare in the schools. It's a topic that's a lot on people's minds. So one is about if local public schools shut down this fall, knowing the impact that how reliant people are on the schools, how does the college plan to support faculty, staff, and their work? Relatedly, are we applying rigorous public health protocols and extending them to the infants and children of faculty and staff, knowing that those contact networks are part of the concern about transmission? And then a question that we heard even before this session, how space can be allocated over at the Child Care Center in particular. So I don't know if it makes sense to take those all at once, but Fred and others, if you want to pick those up.
Yeah, I'll take a shot. Let me talk a little bit about the Child Care Center, because that's so important to all the work we do. Carrie, let me take a step back. The state has guidelines with respect to the opening of a Child Care Center, and Carrie Gagne is working on a plan to get approved by the state that allow us to open. But it does need state approval. The state has restricted the capacities of daycare centers, so we will not be able to, at phase one, be able to meet the entire need of the parents and children that attend the center. So we will start during the summer with probably a 3-day week with shorter hours, something closer to 8:30 to 4 than the typical 8 to 5:15. And expand that as we go through the phases, and hopefully get to 5 days a week well before classes begin. We will be implementing all the protocols that are in the state guidelines. Obviously, there won't be 6-foot distance between teachers and children in the center, but you'll see a different process for check-in. There'll be, for example, a phased check-in. You'll be checking in your child outside in the tent before the child goes into the building. It's a whole set of protocols, which Carrie will begin to communicate with parents. In terms of allocation, it is, depending how things go, but it's unlikely we'll be able to meet full-time need for every single parent at the Children's Center. So Carrie will be working with parents to figure out the absolute level of care they will need, and hopefully we can juggle those needs so everyone can get the care they need come the fall. That's the current plan. It'll change over time. And we're trying to meet as much need as possible for as many parents as possible. And we'll probably need some cooperation in terms of the amount of care that is absolutely necessary for you to do your job. We're also going to be working closely with, I know on the administrative side for staff, with supervisors. And so if we're unable to meet full-time care for staff on campus, we're going to be working closely with supervisors to adjust the schedules of those staff members if they can't work a full-time job because of lack of childcare. So this is going to be another, much like the health commitment, a community effort. We're all going to have to pitch in and be flexible on the child care center.
And I don't know if Safa or Denise want to weigh in on the faculty side, but I think similarly, since I think we're aware of about the public schools, we're obviously all watching that closely. I have a child in the public school here too, so it's something we're obviously keeping a close eye on and trying to figure out how it will affect each one of us. But we are hoping that chairs will work closely with faculty and departments around schedules, and we're thinking a lot about, of course, impact to childcare on not just teaching but research profiles. And that's, I think I just would remind you that at the beginning I talked about things that are figured out and things that we're continuing to think about and work on over the summer. And this is one of the areas where I know we have to continue to talk about the ongoing impact of COVID on our faculty across time. And I know that Safa and CAP will be having some of those conversations as well. Safa, do you want to say anything else about that right now? No.
Just to say that we're particularly attentive about this, of how this will affect untenured faculty members, and that we're going to be having those conversations, as Maud said. So I just want to highlight that, and that we'll be asking the folks at the Child Care Center to prioritize among the faculty the folks who are untenured, so our colleagues who are untenured.
I just want to add, and Danielle may jump in, that we're being cognizant of all the school systems and recognizing that under some of the current plans, the plans could be different for North Adams versus Williamstown versus Pittsfield, or Vermont versus New York. And so really being cognizant that our faculty and staff come from a vibrant set of communities, and that those plans can be different, and more to Fred's point, being very flexible. And I also want to just say we're thinking outside the box and thinking about community collaborations with other entities that provide school age-based care, such as the Williamstown Youth Center, and how we might collaborate with entities like that to provide support for faculty and staff for care in different ways than we have in the past. So I just want to express that we're thinking not just about Williamstown and the Mount Greylock Regional School District, but also thinking about all of these vast areas. It's really important to be cognizant of all of those different impacts.
I guess I would add one just acknowledgement that a number of faculty have written with questions pertaining to the scheduling of fall classes, and we're aware that we're asking units to schedule the course times for fall classes before there's full information about both the child care center as well as the area schools and other community centers. And so we just are going to ask chairs to be as flexible as possible in supporting scheduling of course times that are going to meet the needs of all the faculty, including, but not limited to, faculty who have small children. And knowing, for example, that the Children's Center is unlikely to have operating hours after 4 p.m. is probably relevant for faculty to know, and just to be aware. It may also mean that closer to the actual beginning of the school year, some timing of scheduled classes may need to change, but to the best that one is possible to make decision. You just do the best you can in making decisions about when to schedule your classes for the fall with imperfect information.
And just lastly, as a plug in the same theme of flexibility, we drafted a guide that's on the HR website. It's on the accommodations exemption form. It's in the announcement feed. It was in the email link yesterday. A guide for managers how to think about this and how to have those conversations with the theme of flexibility. HR is there available to, if you have these constraints that you cannot work at all, your work cannot be done remotely, we're here to help and support in those conversations, but we try to give some tools and resources for managers to navigate that conversation.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. A lot of detail, a lot of attention to that issue, I know, right from the very beginning. Shifting now, we've had quite a few questions come in about contact tracing, which is another area that people are really wondering about how that all works. Contact tracing means a lot of different things depending on who you're talking to and where you're talking about it. So maybe if some of you could take us through how that will work, what will trigger it here, how it'll be done, what we should all expect in that domain, it might be helpful.
Fred, just before you jump in to answer it, because I know you're overseeing this process, I just want to say I haven't been able to follow the conversation and read all the questions coming in, but I am hoping, Jim, that we're keeping track of them, because I know there's some specific issues, particularly around contact tracing. I just wanted to say that, you know, we are continuing to develop this over the summer as well. So whatever we tell you today is in some ways incomplete, and it will be a topic we can circle back on and follow up on as we have developing conversations with the institutional partners that we're working with.
Absolutely, and so that just so that people know, as we record this session, we are also capturing the questions that are being asked, and so a lot of those will be followed up with after the session is over.
No, I'm sorry, Fred, to you.
Sure. So a couple of things. We're really lucky here in the county to have a robust contact tracing system that has been in place since the beginning of the crisis. As they've explained to us, has worked in many institutional settings already, some of which that we never heard about because of the work they did. So the key to contact tracing is timing and speed. So the fact that we will be able to get tests back between 24 and 36 hours is a major plus for us. We're going to tie the contact tracers directly into the testing program so that as soon as a positive comes back, the contact tracers will begin their work. As it's been explained to me, I'm not an expert in this field. They have criteria for who is actually a close contact. It's generally within 6 feet for more than 10 or 15 minutes. They are very good at soliciting information from people who they call to find out who the close contacts are. They share some of those techniques with us, with Deb, Flynn, and I. And so I'm pretty confident we'll have a pretty robust program for contact tracing. What happens when they find the close contacts is we get those, let's say they're students, we get those students into quarantine, and they will be monitored by the health center at that point in their dorms or in quarantine space. I don't know if I covered all the questions that are out there, Jim. I'm not following the chat myself.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. That was kind of an aggregate question, so there wasn't any one specific one I was steering you towards, but I think that covers the territory pretty well. I'll ask a specific question now that's come up in a different area, and I noticed that people are not raising their hands as much. Just a reminder that you are welcome to raise your hand and ask your own question on the air, as it were, if you want to, and if not, I'll continue to drone on your behalf. For those staff continuing to work remotely, this person's wondering what the timeline is for a return to campus. They're hearing rumors that it will extend at least until the end of the calendar year. And they're also wondering how much notice will be given before people are expected to transition back to working in person on campus.
I think I started that rumor because I put out a little bit of a message. And we did put as a general guideline we published yesterday, I think as Fred said, earlier, if someone has successfully been able to work from home. We hope they continue to do so through the end of the calendar year. So that part of the rumor has some truth. But this is going to be a key component of, again, of the departmental work plans and how those that word successfully work from home might be defined differently in different areas. We've talked about this a lot in HR, and some folks just can't, they can only do 60, 70% of their work from home. So there might be a phased return of 1 day per week, but we'll rotate and turn that dial very slowly to do some essential functions. Again, it's just each department deciding what those essential and key functions are, and maybe having to adapt those in this current environment. So there is truth to that end of the calendar year, and it's going to vary wildly, I think, by department need and by specific job within each department. So folks should be talking to their, and as well as we talked about the child care limitations and other life demands, right? So folks should be talking with their department heads, and we'll be working on those with the respective department heads to iron out any bumps along the way.
And even the end of the calendar year, I mean, even that we have that date out there, it should be noted that we are, that is a relatively arbitrary date, right? Obviously, if we get wonderful news before then, we could change it, but it's also quite possible that this is going to be with us as an issue we're managing well into the new calendar year, and with that also new information. And we're going to be, I think, consistently, it's a little bit why there was a lot of emphasis on this announcement yesterday, of course, but I think folks should understand that this is going to be an ongoing set of conversations, and we'll be consistently evaluating the guidelines from the state, what we're learning from other schools and things that they're going through, and learning what we're learning, very importantly, as we open. And I said in the letter yesterday that we are certainly erring on the side of caution to see what the issues are going to be. So we're always going to be doing that, but obviously with the eye to and the hope that over time that won't be as necessary. But I right now don't know an end date for that.
Thanks. And it seems like Kim Brown has heard my plea, so Kim will be asking a question next, and then will come back to me because we've had a number of questions around reporting of rates of test results. So I want to make sure we cover that before the end of the session. But Kim, if you're ready, go ahead.
Yes, hi. My question is in regard to contact tracing, and if it makes sense for people entering your building to have a log of sorts to say who's been in there that day. I know big dining halls wouldn't make sense, but I know like my office, just because my memory isn't that great.
So I guess the question is, should we begin to keep little like journals to make sure if we do get contacted by a tracer, that we'd be able to give them accurate information. That was not the advice they gave us. We asked questions, and we can follow up on this when we meet with them again this week. But we asked questions like, will class schedules be helpful? Will groups you work in, like a a cappella group or some group you're in, would that be helpful? And they said no, that they work individually with the positive case and then the contacts they had. And they really weren't looking for a lot of supplemental information from us regarding those kinds of things, Kim. So it was a surprise to me, and I can follow up to make sure I can confirm that.
All right, thank you.
Let me just add, Fred, that I think one of the reasons why we've and I mentioned sort of building access control, as you work through your individual departmental work plans, you might move to a, rather than we're open and people walk in, it's more of an appointment-based function. So naturally your appointment calendar or things like that would provide that type of information. So as departments are thinking about their normal services, you might think about an appointment-based structure rather than just open walk-ins as you think about business processes and redesigning them. And that would sort of assist with that, who did I meet with? When did we have a meeting? Those kinds of things. So just a plug to think about that as part of departmental work plans and business processes.
Thanks, Matt. I would add to that just coming out of the work that the working group has done about communications, for those of you who are managing offices, I'd say on the faculty side, virtual office hours are kind of a given. It's maybe more part of your life already. but for the administrative offices around campus, that sometimes it may be appointment only. Sometimes it may be just virtual drop-ins of, hey, we're going to have figuratively the phones or the video cameras on from 2 to 4 o'clock on Thursday. Come by with any question, essentially a smaller version of what we're doing here, maybe another way to provide people the flexibility to find out what they need from you without you having to do chunks of half an hour or an hour at a time. So I just want to encourage people to think about that where it makes sense for your operation. I do, like I promised, want to get back to this question because it's now come up quite a few times, and we're down to the last 12 minutes or so. A couple of folks have asked, will information be made available to the campus community about the rates of positive tests in the student, staff, and faculty population? I guess I would tack on a question that I know we've discussed in senior staff before also, which is the question of who will find out if there is a positive test result, for example, of a person in a classroom or in a workspace or whatever. So maybe we could address those two together.
Sure, I'll take a first shot of those. So we are planning on having a dashboard during the semester that'll keep track of relevant data that'll be important to the community. And I'm supposing that positive tests will be part of that dashboard on campus. We have positive tests on campus. We're going to be fortunate in one sense that we will know more about COVID on the Williams College campus than any other place in Berkshire County during this time. So we want to get a dashboard out there that people can see on a daily basis what the situation is. In terms of who will be notified, Jim, was that the second question? Who will be notified of a positive test? HIPAA regulations are such that positive tests will go back to the client, if you will, the person who gets the positive test, as well as the health professional working with them and the contact tracer. So if you are a close contact, you will hear from the contact tracer, you're close contact of that positive case, but otherwise you will not hear about the positive case individually by person.
Thanks, Fred. Another thing that's just come in, if an employee has to quarantine to do contact on campus, will they be paid or will they have to use sick time or vacation time? Oh, due DUE. So if an employee has to quarantine due to contact on campus, will they be paid or will they have to use sick or vacation time?
They will be paid.
And I think the specific answer, I think we need to figure this out. It could be sick time, but we would likely continue to use the COVID pandemic earnings code to track time. So we have a sense of that. So I think there's a little bit to be determined there, but as Fred said, they will be paid.
Sorry, I was in the wrong window. Will department staff be responsible for disinfecting public areas in their workspaces, or there are additional measures that facilities will be taking?
Facility, there's going to be a lot of pressure on facilities during this. I just want to make that pitch for them. The increased protocols for them in cleaning are going to be intense for them in terms of cleaning, particularly in cleaning bathrooms. They're going to be cleaning bathrooms in the residence halls every single day, as opposed to the 1 day a week or 3 days a week. Same is true for our public bathrooms. So to manage this with the existing staff, they're going to do a little less in some areas like vacuuming carpets or maybe cleaning floors. But they're going to be in all the public areas doing all the cleaning they currently do under the flu guidelines they have. They will not, however, be in personal spaces, so they won't be in offices cleaning up separate offices. But if you run into a custodian on campus, please thank them for the work they're doing, because it's really going to be a lot of pressure for them.
Thank you, Fred. And turning to a travel question that we heard a bit even before the meeting again, how will personal or essential business travel related, how will personal or essential business related travel be managed by the college, and will additional vacation or personal time be required for possible mandated quarantines, which we've answered already, but maybe the first half, Matt.
This is really going to be, this is what we're going to have to answer with. We'll be in touch. We're currently have a prohibition on college-sponsored professional travel, and we're going to keep that in place through the end of the calendar year, through the end of the semester. Personal travel is trickier. Each state has their own rules at this point. I personally feel like the Massachusetts rules are kind of inconsistent, but we will continue to update this process as we go through as state regulations change. We ask you to be open about the travel you're taking. Be careful and follow public health guidelines in the travel you're taking. If you do want to go on vacation, you may be required, based on state guidelines, to quarantine when you come back. And if that's the case, we're going to ask you to take sick leave or vacation time for that quarantine time because of personal travel. But this is an area that's going to change over time, and any answer I give you today will probably change between now and the end of August. I don't know if Danielle or Matt, you want to add anything?
I just want to clarify that it would not be an appropriate use of sick time. I think that would be an exception. It would be expected to be additional vacation time in those cases. We did publish some guidelines, just as in the same spirit that Fred just mentioned. The virus doesn't know the state line boundary. It's a little rigid. We live on a state line, but we ask people to use really good judgment and talk about this and where your travel is going to be. Are you going into large groups? Are you at a higher risk? And that you have a responsibility to your coworkers and the campus to not bring that back, right? Some people are on rotating schedules. They can coordinate it with their rotation and use a little less vacation time. If you get on an airplane, that is different increase of risks, I believe. So it's not a simple answer, I'm afraid, but we try to put a framework around it on the current guidelines right now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think there's been, let's see, a few run others. Is there any instance in which, and this may wind up being our last question given the amount of detail that it'll take for the answer and then a few notes at the end, is there a specific point or a specific number of cases that would cause the college to go back to an entirely remote mode as we did last March?
I think, as I said in the message that we circulated yesterday, we cannot guarantee that this is going to be a semester that remains on campus till Thanksgiving, although that is certainly my hope. I really do not want to send people home mid-semester if we can avoid it. I think it's not really so much a number in my mind, but I will be keeping a very close eye on a couple of key questions. One will be the hospitals in the region and what our partners there are telling us about what they can handle and if it's different than they expected. As we noted in the letter, they have learned a lot since March, and they have figured out what they are capable of handling, and they have assured us that they're in a good spot for moving forward. But if we heard otherwise from them, that would be one of several important factors that we would keep in mind. A second, of course, would be rates of infection on our own campus, and if they went beyond a point where we could handle them. And that has as much to do with taking care of people who are ill, but also staffing the key offices that would, say, feed them. And we have a lot of good plans and backups in place. So I don't see this as, this would be a very unfortunate outcome and rates that I think none of us are, well, I won't say expect, but we are very much hoping that it doesn't go that way. We know, and it has come up, I said it yesterday and I can say it here, we know that we will have COVID on our campus. So having COVID on the campus is not itself going to be a factor in determining whether or not we would move in the direction of shutting down. But being able to manage the cases we have successfully and doing so in a community which is also feeling like it can manage the cases that it is encountering. I think that those would be the key factors. I don't know if others on the unit here on the panel would like to weigh in.
No, I just reiterate, it's going to be no one thing. It's going to be a combination. This is something, again, we've been advised by our public health advisors that there's no one thing. You've got to take it all, the context of the entire situation, community spread, what's happening on campus, and your staffing capability.
Right. Thank you. So I know we're moving to the end now. Questions that didn't get answered, we will continue to communicate with you, obviously, through the offices that you're affiliated with, and also there, I believe, will be other opportunities to gather over the summer when there's information to share. And so we'll be in touch about that going forward. Before everybody signs off, I did want to say that we have an interesting opportunity today, which is that it's June 30th, and it happens that two of members of senior staff are actually, this is their last day. One is Denise Buell and the other is Steve Klass. And Denise, I already, in the last faculty meeting, because I thought that was the last gathering of faculty before you completed your work for this role at Williams. And so I had the faculty sort of by dint of unmuting the panelists and clapping, thank you for your work. Steve, you didn't have that ritual happen to you yet. So, so we get to do it again for you, Denise, and also Steve, for you today. If I could just ask the folks in the panel to unmute and give a round of applause to these ones. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone again for your ongoing goodwill and patience and good questions and engagement as we continue to move through these challenging questions and towards September. So thanks to everybody. Jim, did you have any concluding?
Thanks, Maud. Yes, just a couple of notes for those of you who are still on. We have a student town hall from 2 to 3:30 this afternoon. So if you're working with students, they've been told, but please encourage them to join that. That'll be very important, I think, for them. There will also be one for parents and families tomorrow night, Wednesday, July 1st, 8 to 9 p.m. And there's one for athletics tomorrow afternoon. This is all on the coronavirus website, which has had a huge update. So please use the FAQs there, submit more questions. We'll post a recording of this session as soon as we possibly can, probably this afternoon. And thank you.